This is a presentation from the 2013 Cannabis World Summit. Please visit www.cannabisworldsummit.com for more great cannabis information, which is available to you completely for free. This information is being made available to you in part thanks to our sponsors. Please visit their websites to learn more about their excellent products and services. The following presentation is for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Leaves of Hope Productions, Inc. Please note that regardless of any statements expressed or implied in the following presentation, that we do not condone you breaking any laws. We are not providing any legal, medical, or financial advice of any kind. No comments about cannabis being a cure for any medical use, expressed or implied, is to be taken as a claim or guarantee. None of the statements have been verified by the FDA of the United States, Health Canada, or the governing organizations of your particular country. And again, this information is being provided for informational purposes only, and the participants exercise their freedom of speech discussing what they believe to be true. We do not guarantee the accuracy of any information provided. It is your responsibility to evaluate the information before you choose to make any use of it. Please consult with a doctor knowledgeable about cannabis prior to using cannabis, and or prior to discontinuing any medications you may be currently using. Please check with the laws of your country and region to determine whether you are legally permitted to use and or grow cannabis prior to any involvement with cannabis yourself. Even though we believe that cannabis ought to be legalized, we do not condone you violating any laws. Please review the legal disclaimers on the Cannabis World Summit website and only proceed to enjoy this presentation if you agree with all legal disclaimers, agree to hold the company, Leaves of Hope Productions Inc., and the presenters harmless and are of legal age in your region. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com for the music used in this introduction.
I have Dr. Bob Melamede on the line with us today. He's quite a fascinating character. He teaches university courses about endocannabinoid systems that so few people have any understanding about. I'm sure many of you have heard of Dr. Melamede from the various research that you might have done. He's also the president and CEO of Cannabis Science, and I'm looking forward for Dr. Melamede to share more about our endocannabinoid systems, how cannabis works and helps us with all that, and of course if you can talk about cannabis science and what you're doing to, of course, make this medicine more mainstream. I'd greatly appreciate you sharing your wisdom with all of us here today. So thank you very much for accepting to do this call, Dr. Melamede.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I think the more information we get out there is extremely important, because what we're seeing is that the population of medical marijuana users is often greatly more informed about the underlying biology than other doctors and the scientists, which is a little bit pathetic, really.
Well, I guess we're the only ones who are actually paying enough attention to research or care enough about the subject, but of course, doctors and scientists should care more about this, shouldn't they?
Well, absolutely, because it's at the heart of really their very profession, because of the endocannabinoid system, the marijuana from within that we all produce, that literally regulates everything in our body from the time of conception until the time of death. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of our body systems, our immune system, digestive system, cardiovascular system, reproductive system, skeletal system, our skin, all of those body systems are regulated by the pot that our body makes. In fact, our cannabinoid receptors and the compounds, the ligands as they're known scientifically, the compounds that bind to those receptors, that's the most prevalent neurotransmitter system in the human brain, and yet the topic is minimally touched on, if at all, in our medical schools and our pharmaceutical schools and in our education, our undergraduate and graduate education courses. So we're missing something very, very fundamental in our education.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into that, and of course you're going to be educating us a lot about that today, and so many of us are actually in for a treat listening to you today. But before you start talking about that, perhaps it would be a good idea for people to get to know a little bit about who you are. Can you first of all start off with how did you get started with cannabis some years ago? And I'm sure you you weren't born into the cannabis field. I'm sure that there must be a story of how you've discovered, whether it be recreationally or medicinally, its benefits, and then, of course, how you pursued that from an educational perspective, learning more about it, researching it, and then talking about the companies that you're doing today so that so we have an understanding, and, of course, you're an educator as well, just so that we know who it is that we're listening to, and, of course, this gives people an understanding of why your words are actually definitely something that they should be paying attention to. You have a lot of credibility behind you, and I think people need to know who you are in that respect. So can you just share a little bit about yourself, first of all?
Well, I'm happy to say that my mother activated my endocannabinoid system at a very early age because I was breastfed, and breast milk, human breast milk and other breast milk, in fact, has got a significant amount of psychoactive endocannabinoids in it. Mm-hmm. When we first come out, our brain needs to be protected from the higher oxygen levels that we experience when our lungs start to work, as opposed to placenta-driven oxygen providing us as fetuses. Mm-hmm. We also need to relax a little from the trauma of childbirth. You know, you're often in there in that first delivery for way too long. And then we need to get our appetite stimulated because we're now going to be taking in food from our mouth as opposed to via the placenta. So psychoactive cannabinoids are in mother's milk, hence one of the main categorizations of mammals is that they have mammary glands, and a significant reason for that is to give the baby the protection necessary upon birth. And then I'm also, now 65 years old, so I was in high school and college during the 60s. So like any normal person, I consumed cannabis, and I found it to be very beneficial for me. I started college when I was 16, and I started using cannabis when I was 16. And what I realized soon on was that I was an idiot, not for using cannabis, but because I was not applying myself as a student in college. What you're there for is to learn, not to ace a test or to, finish. You're there to learn. That's the whole purpose. And I wasn't knowledgeable about that, really. I wasn't prepared for the educational enrichment that college afforded me because that was not really what was stressed throughout my earlier education as well. And cannabis makes you self-reflective. Mm-hmm. And self-reflective for me was that I was not doing what I needed to do. And in large part, I think that's because I've always been very ADD. I have had and still do tremendous trouble focusing and paying attention for any significant amount of time mm-hmm. without jumping around. And cannabis helped me in understanding that, so it gave me a target, so to speak, for self-improvement. And by the time I got to graduate school, I became probably one of the best students at the university. In fact, I did have the highest grades on my PhD exams, which I studied for using cannabis. And actually most of the education that I've had over the decades has occurred with cannabis use. So if I could just interject here, first of all, you said that you started college when you were 16. That's a bit young. So obviously, you're definitely that definitely implies that you're a little bit of a sharper tool in the shed, so to speak. You're a little bit perhaps more intelligent, endowed than average. But also, what's interesting is, am I understanding you correctly here that you're saying that with the help of cannabis, you've, of course, overcame the focus issues with the ADD, and, of course, you were able to study better with it, and essentially because of cannabis, you're actually saying that you were able to ace your way all the way up through your PhD? Am I understanding that correctly? Is that what you are, because what cannabis did was it made me addicted to learning. and I still suffer from that addiction.
Good addiction.
The thing is, with the right philosophy and with the right biochemistry, it's very natural for us to become lifelong learners. In fact, lifelong learning is one of the things that sustains us as individuals because of the nature of the physics that underlies life. It's all about flow. It's all about movement further from equilibrium into higher levels of complexity. And we do that mentally by learning. So learning helps us be healthy, essentially. Not only what we learn, but the learning process itself is beneficial to us.
Fantastic. So, you've also decided to go, so you've studied cannabis. I would imagine back in those days there wasn't too many college courses or university courses specifically about endocannabinoid systems as you're teaching.
Well, we didn't even know about it back then. It wasn't until 1988, really, that an experiment demonstrated that if you use radioactive cannabinoid compounds, synthetics in this case, when you give them to a mouse and then look at how they're distributed in the mouse brain, you find out that they're in localized little areas indicating some kind of receptor binding those radioactive compounds as opposed to having it randomly distributed. So that was the first indication that man had receptors for cannabinoids. And that was the beginning of our knowledge that we have an endocannabinoid system. And, of course, it's not like we developed that system simply so we could get high by consuming the plant. Subsequently, it became quite clear that we have a very complicated biochemical method for generating a variety of lipid, fat compounds that bind to the first receptor as well as the subsequent receptors that have been identified. So the endocannabinoid system is extremely, extremely complex, as you might imagine, if it's going to regulate everything, which it does. So it's just a very unique system that has profound health-giving properties. Obviously, using large quantities of it can take you more into a psychedelic realm, which is not going to be beneficial for everyday use other than what a person might philosophically learn from those experiences. But, that's not where you want to be every day. That would not allow you to be functional as an individual or as a member of society. So
now, before we get into the proper use of it, and definitely want to make a note of that to talk about the proper use, but you also teach college courses now, just so that people know, and then, of course, I want to also talk about your company as well. So you're actually one of the few teachers that are actually providing courses on endocannabinoid systems and in the university. What university is it that you teach?
I'm at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. I'm a tenured associate professor. And I got into teaching about cannabinoids and more shifting my research into cannabinoids. I was always pathologically interested in what is life. And because of that, I pursued a field known as far from equilibrium thermodynamics, which basically means energy flows. And when energy flows, this physics created by Nobel laureate Ilya Prigogine, when energy flows, it organizes mass. So, the sunlight hitting the prebiotic earth generated energy flow, and that organized mass. And the complexity of the interactions of the organized mass is what led to the evolution and the emergence of life and the continued evolution of life. And as biochemical complexity increased, we reached the point where the endocannabinoid receptors emerged. And as I mentioned, that's present in all vertebrates and regulates everything, all of our body systems. So we have something very, very unique here. And there's a philosophy and a physics that I've developed that links together the work of Prigogine, who, in my opinion, was the smartest person that ever lived. and for the next hundreds of years we'll be learning to apply what this man has given us. So I've been fortunate enough to have discovered him in my search for trying to understand what life is. You know, back when I was an undergraduate student, that's when we first discovered the genetic code and the relationship between DNA and RNA and protein synthesis, the Holy Trinity as it was known. And we know a lot more today, but what that knowledge did not provide us with is an understanding of how that came about. It gave us an understanding that there's common mechanisms to all life, having to do with DNA, RNA, and protein, et cetera, enzyme activity, but it didn't explain how that all happened.
Okay.
So back in the day, I took a course on thermodynamics, energy flow, but in fact, thermodynamic courses then, and for the most part today, don't deal with flowing energy, they deal with equilibrium situations. And what that essentially means is a discharged battery. You can't do anything with a discharged battery, but you can do a lot with a charged battery. And that's basically the difference between equilibrium thermodynamics and far from equilibrium thermodynamics. And quite interestingly, the conventional equilibrium thermodynamics basically says that life is too improbable to occur, and therefore it must be a miracle. Alternatively, far from equilibrium thermodynamics says life must occur, because flowing energy will generate complexity and generate nonlinear rearrangements that could be characterized as the emergence of life and the emergence of speciation and the development of everything. Our societies, our consciousness, our political systems, and our financial systems are natural emerging phenomena from the underlying flow of energy. And again, it's the emergence of the endocannabinoid system with the development of vertebrates that has provided the enhanced ability to basically interact with the environment. What the physics teaches us is that for a system like a living system to maintain itself, it has to extract more organization or negative entropy from the environment than entropy that it generates. In other words, if we're going to maintain organization, we have to provide us with the raw material for organization and maintain that. And, you know, our cannabinoid system provides us with food because our hunger is regulated by it. Every time anybody on the planet gets hungry, they basically get hungry because the brain hunger centers produce endocannabinoids and we give ourselves the munchies. So now we have essentially charged up the biological battery because we have energy. And then as that energy flows, we can do all sorts of wonderful things with it, but among the things that will be happening is that those highly reactive free radicals that are generated as a result of burning off food will interact with everything else. All of the, you know, lipids and carbohydrates and proteins and nucleic acids that compose life can be damaged by those free radicals and bring us closer to equilibrium, in other words, closer to death. Which is why free radicals are the basis of all aging. On the other hand... Now, you also said,
I remember we were talking before that, of course, the endocannabinoids and cannabis contributing to more cannabinoids is one of the secrets of anti-aging because it regulates the aging process and everything else.
Right.
As well.
Well, it regulates everything ultimately in my perspective, and this is not universally or widely accepted, but it's becoming more so, I think. I'm a very conservative scientist, let me add, so that everything I say I can verify to the hilt. The problem is a lot of scientists are very closed-minded, and doctors, I'm sad to say, and as a result, they are not even curious to learn about the science. I've just had this experience recently.
Bob, can I just ask you, because of the type of science that you're in, of course, you say that you're a conservative scientist, but I know in certain other fields of science, there's, of course, some controversy that some scientists are somewhat shunned in some respects, or even just stating your official scientific opinion can actually be contrary to the grain of common opinion, and so of course that can have negative repercussions upon you. In a sense, I would imagine that you might be regarded as somewhat of a hippie scientist because you're dealing with cannabis. do you find that you have the full respect of the scientific community, or is it because of the fact that you're on this subject of cannabinoids and cannabis that is there any negative repercussions that you've been experiencing as a result of that?
Oh, absolutely. There are people, just like with everything else, there are open-minded scientists who are cannabinoid endowed, and there are half of them that are going to be below average. I mean, that's a natural distribution. It was very sad to me to realize that scientists are like everyone else. I thought that because their field of interest was to learn the truth, which is what science is about, discovering the truth, that they would be different. But in fact, they're as stupid as anyone else. The tremendous amount of them know nothing about the cannabinoid system and don't want to learn about it because it threatens their status quo. Just the other day, I've been working on an article that compiles really these philosophies and scientific thoughts into a very well-documented, scientifically verified presentation. And in giving that to some people who I work with, the comment that I heard indirectly was that I'm crazy. The person responded by saying he may be crazy, but he's also right. So I stand by that, Mm-hmm. I definitely have out-of-the-box thinking. Mm-hmm. And typically, the same way as in the government, it's the narrow-minded, uptight, aggressive people that become dominant.
Mm. And I definitely want you to talk about the blips and the flips that you were telling me about earlier as well, because I think that's actually quite a fascinating concept. But can I just ask you to could you just briefly share with us before we get into sort of the heavy meat of the discussions here? You're also the president and CEO of Cannabis Science, and you mentioned a couple interesting things that your company is doing to move forward with this medicine in mainstream society. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you're doing there?
Well, I believe that we've just fallen into something that's incredibly important for the human race, and in particular for those of us who've been oppressed by cannabis racism, and we can talk about that later as well.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Sure.
But originally, what we wanted to do, and still do, and are proceeding very nicely, if you go onto the Cannabis Science website, and you see the world-class team of amazing drug developers and scientists that have come on board. We have the former former Assistant Surgeon General of the United States. We've got a variety of top-notch drug developers, people who have made the HIV drugs that have saved millions of people. Former head of drug development from GlaxoSmithKline, Dorothy Bray. Former head of drug development from Pfizer, former head of DARPA, the Defense Agency Research Program. We've got top-notch people here who have been open-minded enough to understand that we're dealing with something very unique. And I think the thing that convinced a lot of them was the first-hand experience that we've been able to demonstrate to them. So let me back up first and say that the way we thought it would best be able to get through the FDA and crack open this door was to use cannabis extracts, Rick Simpson oil, essentially.
Bob, can you just hold on a second? Something that changed with your voice that just it doesn't sound as clear as it was before. Did you either do something to your headset or? I'm just wondering.
No, I'm speaking right into my iPhone, so okay. I don't know what happened.
Now it works perfectly. It just sounded a little bit muffled a moment ago, but now it sounds perfect. So anyways, so you were using the Rick Simpson extract.
Basically for topical applications. It works so well for basal cell and squamous cell carcinoma, mm-hmm. and we had some very, very dramatic examples of that we published on our Cannabis Science website. However, what occurred as a result of that is that's how we linked up with these highly skilled people. And as a result, what we did was we divested the company of all of the activism things that we were initiating. So those are now in a separate public company, a shell called Exchange Corporation, and we're developing all of these wonderful hemp-based products and other cannabis products under the brand name of Phytiva. which is moving forward very nicely.
Phytiva, did you say?
Phytiva, yeah. Phyte like phyto for plant and tiva like for sativa, right?
Okay.
Phytiva.
Okay, yes.
And everything in cannabis science now is 100% solely devoted to drug development to get through the FDA. So along the way, what happened was we became involved with the HIV community.
Okay.
Because of what we had demonstrated with skin cancer. So what I'm going to explain to you now is extremely profound and important. And I believe that this is what's going to change the entire world with respect to cannabis.
Okay.
So it turns out, quite sadly, that we are now at the beginning of the second AIDS epidemic in the United States. Long-term survivors who've had their lives saved by the antiretroviral drugs, which are good drugs in the sense that they save lives, as opposed to killing people like other drugs. And so
Thanks for making the distinction.
Well, antibiotics and antiretrovirals in general, I feel, are good drugs. I mean, penicillin is a great drug, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, where I'm going with this is that the long-term HIV survivors are now failing. They've developed resistance to all of the different classes of antiretroviral drugs. HIV is a retrovirus. It means it's an RNA virus that gets turned into DNA, and then so it's the reverse of how things normally go.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, the antiretrovirals have saved millions and millions of lives. And they're failing now. And the way we can see that it's failing is that as the immune system of these long-term survivors becomes compromised, they become susceptible to other AIDS-related illnesses, in particular a cancer called Kaposi sarcoma, which is, if you remember back to in the day when HIV first emerged, people were covered with these purple blotches.
Okay.
And those are essentially blood vessel cancers that emerge out on the skin. They create very painful, horrible lesions. They eventually move to internal organs and kill people. Mm-hmm. There's no effective cure. There's the typical medical approach used for cancer, burn it or freeze it or poison it or cut it, but that they just come back.
Mm-hmm.
So right now there are literally millions of people dying in Africa with Kaposi's. There's no effective treatment. It turns out that cannabis extracts can completely put Kaposi's into remission. When applied topically, the lesions literally fall off. Sometimes non-painfully and smoothly, other times extremely painfully. We're not sure as to the differences, but that's reality.
So this also, just for what it's worth, just to mention here, so essentially this lends credence to credibility to Rick Simpson's oil, in the sense that
Rick Simpson's oil has full scientific credibility if you bother to read the scientific literature. There are over 800 peer-reviewed professional scientific articles that demonstrate cannabinoids have cancer-killing capacity. The big boogaboo in the scientific world is that the scientists and the FDA and the NIH, they've created their own little box that they live in. And you could show 100 people cured of cancer, and that's meaningless to them unless it goes through the FDA and has been subject to appropriate FDA clinical trials, which is what we're trying to do with cannabis science.
Okay.
It's not easy to get that accomplished because even though it's an obvious end, there's a lot of bureaucratic and legal and political nonsense that obfuscates what should be a very simple path.
Okay.
By virtue of rules and regulations that have been created allegedly for the benefit of humanity, often turning out to be to the benefit of pharmaceutical companies and people involved in the research communities.
Now, Bob, let me just ask you this. May I call you Bob, by the way?
Absolutely, that's my name.
Bob,
Most people call me Dr. Bob. I'm commonly known as that.
Okay. Maybe I'll call you Dr. Bob in that case. Dr. Bob, so the one question, I'd just like to play Angel's Advocate here on the phone with you. And now, Angel's Advocate is my preferred version of Devil's Advocate, just a positive reframe of it. Because you mentioned earlier with Cannabis Science, you have a panel of respected people who've been involved in the pharmaceutical industries. You mentioned a number of companies and organizations that some of these individuals have come from. Now, I'm just going to raise an issue here that I'm sure that might have come up already in the minds of some of the other listeners to our conversation. Because there's a lot of distrust in the cannabis movement of pharmaceutical companies. And generally speaking, my general stance is that I believe that inherently most people come from a good place and they want to do good things. However, nonetheless, I'm sure that there are good pharmaceutical companies and pharmaceutical representatives and doctors and all that sort of stuff like that. But nonetheless, there's a lot of mistrust of pharmaceutical companies, representatives, and people from that industry in a cannabis movement because, of course, a lot of suppression has come from the pharmaceutical industry itself. So the question is this. It seems to me that what you're doing with Cannabis Science is fantastic. You're moving it forward in going through the FDA trials and all that sort of stuff like that. It sounds to me like what you're doing is good. But I'm sure that some people might have some questions about the motives, if there's any potential people involved with the organization that might be doing this for the wrong reasons. I'm sure you probably know what I'm alluding to here. Can you possibly address any of those concerns that people might have? Because I think these are concerns that more than one person would naturally come to think of. So perhaps this is your opportunity to squash any of those mental thoughts right at this time, so that people can relax and fully support, at least emotionally, what the work that it is that you're doing with the company of Cannabis Science.
Well, like it or not, we live in a world that is not ideal. To put it mildly,
Mm-hmm.
The main export of the United States is military weapons. I don't consider that an ideal circumstance. So we have a ruling class, so to speak, that are very much involved with creating and maintaining the insanity of the world, often with the effort trying to make a better world. So there's a lot of paradoxes and conflicts that are natural to humanity and our political, social, economic system. And what we need to have is a global change in human awareness. And I think that the best way for that to occur is by increasing the cannabinoid activity of the population. And I think that what I've just described to you, the fact that cannabis can provide relief for millions of people. We have to keep in mind there's somewhere between 35 and 50 million people in the world that are HIV infected. Mm-hmm. We can just scratch them off and let them suffer and die, or we can be humans and be human beings and help people. And in order to do that, we have to penetrate and change and work within the power structure. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. And the fact that we have this reality that we can literally put Kaposi's into remission. It's the number one cancer in Africa. There are millions of people dying from this. They don't even treat them in Africa. They just let them die in horrible, suffering deaths. Mm-hmm. And we have a simple cure that can put it in remission. Once again, if you were to look at the expensive drugs developed by pharmaceutical companies, you could never even make enough of them to treat 50 million people. Whereas with cannabis-based
50 million seeds, and they could do that.
Exactly. And again, what that's going to do is increase the cannabinoid level within the human population, which I believe is the evolutionary destiny, except it's going to happen not on a genetic level. It's going to happen on a biological, physiological level because of consuming increased cannabinoids. Let me point out something that fully supports where I'm going here. You can go to any doctor United States and say, are omega-3 fatty acids good? Should I be taking them? And the bulk of the doctors will say, yes, they're good, and a supplement of fish oil is healthy for your heart and your brain, etc.
Mm-hmm. And that's, of course, in hemp seed oil as well.
Well, what 99% of the doctors do not know is that the reason that these things are good for you is because they're made into endocannabinoids. You're basically increasing your cannabis level by using fish.
Excuse me, can you repeat that and elaborate on that? Because that's news for me, but it's fascinating news. And, of course, coming from you, I completely believe what you're saying. But I think this is very profound. So the omega-3s that we eat, whether it be from a piece of salmon or hemp oil or flaxseed oil or whatever, gets converted into cannabinoids? And that's why
and it's true of the omega. It's true of the omega-6s as well, and other flavors of these essential fatty acids. They're called essential because our body doesn't make them.
Okay.
And they are made into our endocannabinoids. The omega-3s in particular have a more dominant anti-inflammatory effect than the omega-6s. And historically, we took in a ratio as a function of our diet. However, because of the nature of farming and the nature of how we feed our cows and raise our farm products and the foods that we're eating, we have drastically shifted the ratio of omega-3s in favor of a very excess of omega-6s, which have a tendency to be pro-inflammatory because of how they generate inflammatory prostaglandins and other types of lipid metabolites that are involved in turning on inflammation. And again, remember, inflammation has been designed to protect us. It's just that now that we're living longer, what used to be protecting us from infection is now killing us from age-related illnesses. So we need to increase our endocannabinoid content to buffer that, as a natural part of man's destiny, so to speak. And by consuming these fish oils, that's what we're doing. They've been used for depression and for all sorts of things. They've basically been used for everything cannabis is used. Well, why? Because they're made into endocannabinoids. So here we see it.
You know what? That's actually absolutely fascinating, especially what you've just said, is that a lot of people use the omega-3s and these fatty essential oils in much the same way as we would use cannabis, because, yes, I also use cannabis, and I also use omega-3s and other things as well for its anti-inflammatory properties and so on and so forth. And so I do see a correlation there, but I didn't have any realization that there was any cannabinoid relationship between these two substances that can be taken from.
Well, remember, they regulate everything in your life from the time of conception until the time of death. So There's a lot of room for how that's accomplished.
Well, before we were talking, before the interview, we also you were telling me so much wonderful stuff about the role of endocannabinoids for our body and our consciousness, anti-aging, socially, even politically, in the blips and the flips. Can you, for the benefit of all our listeners, that was absolutely fascinating stuff. Do you mind getting onto that soapbox as well to share all that information? Well,
one of the foundations of life is that there's a balance of opposing forces, and that's on all scales, so that when you look at subcellular biochemistry, there's organized chemical flow-dependent structures that manifest as oscillations between opposing forces. And inflammation and turning it off is one of the guiding phenomena, biochemical phenomena of all life. And it manifests itself in so many different ways. So in terms of our brains and open-mindedness, what does open-mindedness mean? It means we take in new information and we replace old information with newer and better information. Well, how do we replace it? It means we have to forget the old. And our cannabinoid system is obviously involved in forgetting. Now, where are those thermostats set is what becomes critical. If we forgot everything, we would be totally non-functional. And if we remembered everything, we would also be non-functional. We'd be suffering from PTSD, and we'd be like a computer rather than a live human being. So in between those extremes, we have the variability of the human population. And because cannabinoids regulate everything, there's all sorts of consequences from being cannabinoid endowed as opposed to being cannabinoid deficient. And with respect to open-mindedness, it's an intrinsic truth that half the population is going to be above average and half the population is going to be below average. So are there consequences to that? And I think the consequences are profound, and I'll elaborate on that. So,
please.
Basically what we're talking about is unhigh people who are angry, uptight, closed-minded versus people who are open-minded, embrace change, and are inventive and creative. Those are two extremes. So cannabinoid deficient people are, what I call blips, backward-looking people. They're not biochemically equipped to embrace change because they don't have enough cannabinoids to deal with the stress of change. Essentially what I'm saying is that all change on all scales, subcellular on up to social and environmental, change is stress. And it's typically manifest as free radicals and their associated biochemical downstream events.
Bob?
Yeah?
It sounded like muffled. I don't know, maybe if on your phone, your chin was resting on it or something like that.
No, I'm holding it right in front of my face. I haven't done
it's
any
perfect
change.
now. Okay, it's perfect now. Sorry, I don't know, just for what it's worth. Anyways, keep talking. Sorry, you were saying something wonderful there.
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is that the people who are cannabinoid deficient are going to naturally be backward-looking because they don't have the biochemical machinery to embrace change, so they want everything to remain the same. So there's your social conservatives, all right? And on the other extreme, you would have people who embrace change because they have the biochemical machinery to do so. They have sufficient cannabinoid activity that they're not stressed by change. One of the characteristics documented for people who are cannabis users is that they tend to be optimistic. What does optimism mean? It means you look into the future, you don't know what it's going to give, but you feel that you're going to be able to adjust to it. Mm-hmm. Well, the reason you can do that is because you're making enough cannabinoids. And that's what they do. They provide you with that ability to be flexible because of how they allow for adaptation. So those are the flips, the forward-looking people. Now, if you look historically at humans' history, we've been ruled by blips, backward-looking, aggressive, uptight, greedy people. Mm-hmm. Genghis Khan to Stalin and Hitler, where are the enlightened ones? There are few. We've had Mandela, we've had Gandhi, we've had Gorbachev, people who created profound global change.
Now, if I could just quickly interject here, Bob, for what it's worth. I remember we mentioned this before our call that I wanted to make sure that we make mention of this at this point in our interview. That it's kind of fascinating, of course, because as I mentioned before, that many people in the cannabis movement, they keep on saying, and we all keep on saying, if only more politicians were to just smoke up a little bit, how much better the world would be. But, of course, what you're now implying here is that, of course, a lot of these politicians, such as Hitler, Genghis Khan, all these mean, uptight individuals, and I'm sure we can name a few politicians that are ruling today that are probably not very endocannabinoid endowed.
I would say the bulk of them.
If they were to, so you're basically letting scientific credence or credibility to the saying that a lot of cannabis users say, if only politicians would partake in cannabis more, how much better the world would be. They'd be more like the Gandhis in the world as opposed to the...
Well, I'm going beyond that. I'm saying that it's necessary for us to have basically a revolution whereby we replace the blips, the backward-looking people, with flips, the forward-looking people. And the reason that that's so essential is that mankind has had such a tremendous impact on our environment in terms of, utilization of resources, in terms of pollution. If we don't make policies that are designed to sustain our future as opposed to the continued rape and pillage of our environment, then mankind, like most species that have ever existed, will go extinct. So for the very survival of mankind, we need to, number one, increase cannabinoid activity as a population as a whole, and we need to have a more prominent role for the forward-looking, more peaceful, more cooperative, more creative people rather than the opposite, which is what's ruled us so far. Now, it's very important that everybody realize that both sides of this are necessary. The way biology works, because of the physics of life, is there's always a balance of opposing forces. It's not like you don't want to have blips, and it's not like you don't want to have flips. You want to have a dialogue, and that dialogue is essentially creating a thermostat setting. Mm-hmm. And all I'm saying is that thermostat setting was set in our evolutionary past, and it was natural for the more aggressive individuals to dominate. But as intelligence develops and prevails, hopefully, we will shift from a world ruled by backward-looking people to a world ruled by forward-looking people, where sustainability becomes the paradigm rather than give me more. Mm-hmm. We can't have growth-based economies continuously increasing our usage and not recycling and not maintaining a biosphere that's going to sustain humanity.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, I guess if we can make it somehow law that our politicians and the people who actually have a significant impact on our world and our politics and our environment...
No, we don't want laws to do that. It's going to naturally occur because people come down with all of these illnesses. And when people realize that they can, burn, chop, and poison, or they can take a plant that's going to make them healthier instead of, hoping that, the cancer dies before the person dies, there's a new paradigm that can be developed that will embrace these far from equilibrium principles as the manifestation of life and its progression and sustenance.
Well, it sounds to me like we're talking, you're touching on two aspects, so it's the body and the consciousness effects of these cannabinoids.
Well, they go together because, see, one of the foundational principles of the physics that I keep referring to is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. If we take an individual and we break them down to their molecular constituents, and you threw them in a big dye tumbler and threw out that tumbler, you'd never get the person. And if you look at all of those little pieces that you've disassociated, you no longer have a living person. You cannot break down life below life and then expect to understand life. You have to be able to look at the dynamics and the holistic manifestations of how these flow-dependent phenomena keep pushing life further from equilibrium, the complexity of evolution and its manifestation in terms of human consciousness. And human consciousness does not exist separate from the rest of the body. It's an integrated whole. Our immune system and our nervous system and our endocrine system and our bones, they're all talking to each other all the time. And if we don't understand that, and if we don't learn how to, shift health through that understanding, then we'll continue to produce ineffective poisonous drugs. It's my belief that the very foundations of the pharmaceutical industry are flawed because they're looking always to manipulate a single pathway, whereas we are actually four-dimensional structures, 3 in time and 1 in space. And it's the dynamic interaction of all of that that creates the whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. And because cannabinoids regulate everything in our body, when we increase our cannabinoid activity, we shift our entire biochemical balance. It's not that we're shifting, trying to cut one string in that four-dimensional fabric. The fabric is designed by evolutionary physics to always maintain homeostasis. Now, if your homeostasis is giving you cancer, you don't want to maintain that homeostasis. You want to shift the entire dynamics of your biochemistry to one that will no longer support the cancer. and the same is true of heart disease and all of our other illnesses.
And so essentially to shift that homeostasis, you'd use the cannabinoids from the cannabis plant in order to accomplish that, yes? Now,
well, they have a unique ability to do so because of how the endocannabinoid system regulates everything. And if you look at Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine, in most cases, you'll see that in one way or the other, they're tapping into the endocannabinoid system.
Okay. Now, just to play angel's advocate again. Of course, before the interview, we also talked about how, for example, if you block the natural endocannabinoids in mice, that of course the mice would become quite depressed, anxious, fearful, and of course all those negative effects. So
they actually die prematurely. They die dramatically younger. So if a mouse can't get high, he's going to die younger.
And there's, of course, I remember drugs. Same with people, because I've heard that there's drugs that inhibit cannabinoids in the human body, and it was used as research as a weight loss supplement or a drug, and of course it helped to reduce weight, but it also made the people suicidal, depressed, anxious, and all that sort of stuff as well. But the question I'm having is this: regarding to be the angel's advocate here, of course, using cannabis. Of course, I understand if your body's already out of that homeostasis, out of that healthy balance, it could be beneficial to bring it back. But for people who are relatively healthy or somewhat unhealthy, or relatively healthy, let's just say, more or less, for them to use cannabis regularly, whether it be recreational or as a supplement for health purposes, as a preventative, wouldn't that necessarily cause more problems in the sense that you're raising the endocannabinoids in the system, and so of course the body has to readjust to those elevated levels? And then, of course, if you were to abruptly stop using cannabinoids, then there's withdrawal symptoms, which are effectively the same thing as though you were taking those drugs to suppress and block the. Well,
see, I object to the whole use of the term drugs. What we're talking about is an essential nutrient for modern man. Mm-hmm. You know, our inflammatory thermostat is set too high, and that's why we are now dying from the age-related illnesses. And the reason that it's set too high is because 100 years ago we had sewers running down our streets, and we had poor nutrition. We didn't have antibiotics. So over the past 100 years, our social cleanliness and our nutritional ability and our antibiotics have given us longer life. So now, essentially, to look at it this way, free radicals are the friction of life, and your endocannabinoid system and your endocannabinoids are the oil of life. Mm-hmm. And when you think of a car, if it had no lubrication, the wheels might not turn, the engine might seize, the windows might not roll down. It's the same situation with our biology. If you remove the oil of life, you don't know what's going to break, but something's going to break for sure. And these are all these age-related illnesses. Mm-hmm. So we need to increase our endocannabinoid content so that we have less biochemical friction, free radicals, negatively impacting on us and resulting in the age-related illnesses. So because everybody, be they cannabinoid deficient or not, is going to age and is going to come down with age-related illnesses, the question is, can we improve our health? And the answer clearly is yes, obviously. And there are many people who don't know that and many people who don't want to know it. But, hey, that's their business. All we're asking for is the freedom to use a God-given plant that we can grow in our backyard as our choice, as free human beings, as free Americans, in order to make decisions about our own lives. You know, the whole idea of getting high really pisses me off because all you're doing is modifying your brain. And when you modify your brain, that's the essence of free speech. You know, the things that come out of our mouths don't start at our lips. They start within us. And if we have freedom, then we have the right to manipulate that. It's absurd.
Okay. Well, you spoke earlier about cannabis racism. Is this a related subject?
It absolutely is, because it's the blips that are making the laws that are incarcerating the flips. And, you know, we all accept racism if we look at somebody and say, oh, well, you know, here we have a black man or a red man or a yellow man or a white man. We can readily identify that they have some genetic component that's different, and we've we pretty much throughout the world acknowledge at this point as part of man's development that we should not be racist. But, you can take a black man and look at his genetics, and he might be more white than he is black because of mixing of the races. And likewise, we have people who are higher or lower levels of cannabinoid activity, and yet it's the cannabinoid deficient people that are making rules against the cannabinoid endowed people. People who have different genetics and who have different biochemistry. How is that any different than racism? Just because we don't see it as a skin color, that doesn't mean anything. That's ludicrous. We are biochemically different if you're cannabinoid endowed versus cannabinoid deficient. And it's not like the cannabinoid endowed people are saying, we're going to arrest you because you don't use cannabis. It's the cannabinoid deficient people that are saying, we're going to arrest you because you are using it. That's racism.
That's an interesting perspective I had never considered before, but I see what you're saying. But now, just to again play angel's advocate here, just to see if I'm understanding here correctly. Of course, we're talking about those who are BLIPs that are not cannabinoid endowed. Of course, we're talking about them oppressing
specifically with respect to consciousness.
But can I just finish the point here? But of course, those who are the FLIPs, or what you label as the FLIPs, were also cannabinoid endowed because of using cannabis. So is that really a genetic thing, or is that just because of the fact that we're actually...
No, they're not cannabinoid endowed because they use cannabis. They're cannabinoid endowed because their biochemistry makes them more cannabinoid endowed. And those are the people who are more likely to experiment with things, because remember, they're optimists. They're not worried that if they use a joint, they're going to rot in hell, and become a drug addict. They're people who take in information and base their lives on the best of their ability of the information that they've been able to take in and continuously take in, rather than, I've learned as a child that marijuana's, devil's weed. If that's stuck in your mind because you can't relearn, well, that's what makes you cannabis deficient. So people who are, if you take those knockout mice that have no CB1 receptor, that genetically can never get high. If you give them cannabis, they're not going to get high. They don't have the machinery. So depending on where your has failed in order to make you cannabinoid deficient, you may be able to supplement, which is why most of us benefit from taking omega-3 fatty acids. You're supplementing your endocannabinoid system. You're overcoming depression. Depression and fear keep you from moving forward.
So, of course, using the omega-3s boosts our cannabinoids system. But I remember also before you were talking about the proper daily use of cannabis is not to get high or to get psychedelic results. But can you talk about more what you were alluding to at that time? How would one use cannabis and or omega-3s or other substances for that matter as well that are precursors or that become endocannabinoids later on through the metabolism in the body? What should we be considering? What would be a proper daily protocol for use to supplement our endocannabinoids?
Well, the most fundamental thing is your cannabis use making you a better, healthier person or not? If it's harming you, then you should use less. I mean, there are people who should not be using it, There are people who develop this addictiveness to it where all they want to do is sit and smoke more and more and more and are not doing anything else. So for people like that, who is a tremendously minute minority, they probably shouldn't use it. But on the other hand, because of its fundamental involvement in aging and age-related illnesses, most people will benefit by increasing their endocannabinoid tone, which can be done in two ways: essential fatty acids intake and cannabis or other plants that help supplement that system. None of them do it with consciousness other than cannabis because of the involvement of THC and the CB1 receptor. We want to be more open-minded so that we can embrace more. If you're using sufficient cannabinoids that help you be more open-minded, help you learn new things, well, that's good. If you're using too much that you're just sitting there like the TV ad from the old presidential, advertisement.
Kumar?
the stoners. No, those are good because those are smart guys having fun. It's the kid who sits on the couch and does nothing but smoke a joint all day and is too lazy to get up and be alive.
Okay.
If cannabis makes you more alive, it's good for you. If it makes you less alive, it's bad for you. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and as free people, we have the right to explore those alternatives and to determine for ourselves. Self-determination is the foundation of freedom.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. We absolutely should have the right, of course, from many different perspectives. Of course, because like you're very familiar with Rick Simpson, I'm sure.
Of course.
From the perspective of using it medicinally, but even as you're implying here, not quite as severe of urgent necessary, like if you're not dying, but what I mean by that is of course from a recreational perspective, if it makes you feel better and it elevates your consciousness, it elevates your state of mind so that you're more productive in your life and in society, and why not have the freedom to use that if it's actually beneficial. But how would you suggest we go about changing these situations? Now, of course, you have a lot of science behind you about backing up why these cannabinoids are actually beneficial for us. And, of course, I'd like for you to talk more about the health benefits and, of course, the anti-aging aspects of it. But perhaps just since we're touching upon the rights to be able to use cannabis, do you have any suggestions on what approaches we could be taking to apply pressure towards the legalization efforts? What perspectives you might have to offer?
Well, I think everything is going to be driven by the science and the health, because everybody is concerned about their health and the health of their family, friends, and loved ones. That's simple reality. It's very few people who don't share that trait. Now, they may be closed-minded and not willing to accept that cannabis can have all of these miraculous benefits that people who have benefited from that and from the plant realize for themselves. You can take a person who completely doesn't believe that cannabis is anything good and you cure their cancer. Most of those people are going to change their minds. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. Now, many of those people who would never go down that path in the first place. So that's their right. Let them use the chemotherapy or whatever they want. But it's my right to choose something else. And as more and more people see the benefits and share that knowledge with their family and neighbors and friends, the more that knowledge is going to spread. And the more people are demanding it. We see it happening all the time with the whole medical marijuana movement. And it is supported by science. It's not like we're making this up. It's supported by science. If you don't support it, you are not supporting science. And because of what I mentioned earlier in terms of the HIV and the Kaposi story, if you are a human being and you know that you can help millions of people and reduce their suffering and their death, you have a fundamental moral obligation to do so. And many people are now realizing that. People on all sides of the political arena are starting to see that because of this HIV story. I think that this is going to be the game changer, because when you have to provide cannabis for 50 million people, it's going to dramatically increase the acceptance as well as the cannabinoid levels of the human population.
And we're talking 50 million people worldwide.
Yeah. And the cost in the United States as this AIDS epidemic, which is just beginning, progresses in terms of treatment for failed regimes, and in terms of treatment for Kaposi's, for the economic health of this country, we're going to have to turn to cannabis because we know it works. Mm-hmm. And we've shown it, and the science supports it. And that's why Cannabis Science is raising funds to go through the FDA. That's why people, of all religions, Christian right, left, etc., people who, when you see that you can help another individual, it's going to have an impact on most people in a way that they're going to say, even if it goes against my beliefs, even if it goes against my religion, I see somebody suffering in front of me and I have the opportunity to help them. I'm going to take that opportunity.
Well, let's definitely take those opportunities to educate the people about how this can actually be a benefit for so many people. Now, of course, You're talking a lot about the people who can benefit from this from AIDS, and obviously you have a lot of science to back up the AIDS. But there's two topics health related that I would like to discuss. Of course, you mentioned that this is anti-aging. This is actually it controls a lot of the aging related aspects of our bodies. But also you of course mentioned a lot about inflammation, and of course a lot of diseases and a lot of illnesses that we're experiencing today are anti-inflammatory or inflammation based. So aside from cancer and the AIDS-related illnesses, something that most people can relate to, like most people have illnesses, most people have inflammation. Everybody's getting older, so that we can really bring home the message that cannabis is not just for those people who are deathly ill or really, really sick. This is something that they can perhaps relate to themselves, that this can actually benefit me. How can cannabis help me? You understand what I'm saying?
All right, I'll give you some examples, and these are totally not accepted in the scientific world.
Okay.
These are anecdotal evidence, and I can provide a theoretical foundation for why it's real. Okay, but let's look at a number of different illnesses. Let's look, for example, at heart disease, the deposition of fat in the arteries. What's going on there? It's basically an inflammatory disease. And what happens is macrophages, which are cells of your immune system, when they are in an inflammatory environment, that makes the blood vessels permeable. And the macrophages get activated, and part of their activation means that they're turned into foam cells. They're called foam cells because they're white. The reason they're white is they're filled with fat. The reason they're filled with fat is they've turned off fat burning. Fat burning is one of the means by which living systems protect themselves from free radicals. You stop using the electron transport system to generate energy. The electron transport system is typically generating energy by burning carbohydrates, sugars, and is generating these free radicals. Literally one molecule interacting with, let's say, a piece of DNA, a base on a DNA of a critical gene, could expand through the living system and kill the person. Let's say we have a gene that controls cell division that gets mutated by one free radical molecule. That free radical molecule's damage could kill the person by creating cancer.
Okay.
So it turns out that we've got trillions of cells in our body, and that every one of our cells every day makes about 10,000 free radical damages in every cell. And one molecule can kill you. So the point here is that through the complexity that has evolved over billions of years of living organisms, we've developed ways that we live in ideally harmony with the free radicals that we're going to produce to the best of our ability. Now, you can have certain illnesses that are going to manifest because we're going to make too much. So back to the cardiovascular story. The activated foam cells, which were originally macrophages, they leave the blood vessels to go to sites where their activity is necessary to help fight off infection. As they leave the blood vessels, extravasation, some of them kind of get hung up there, and they die there, and they're fat-laden. That's what becomes plaque, all right? Mm-hmm. So everybody knows that, caloric restriction is helpful to you. Eating less than the average amount or the desired amount winds up being beneficial to your health. Okay. Well, when you eat less instead of storing fat, you actually turn on fat burning. And when you do that, ketosis is a manifestation of it, like the Atkins diet.
Right.
You start burning fat. And what we've seen with people who have gone on high-dose cannabis for a variety of reasons is that their blood pressure normalizes, they eliminate all of the fat depositions in their blood vessels. It takes high-dose cannabis to do that. Low-dose will not go there. So we're at the beginning of learning a whole new way of looking at life and health based on this physics, based on the roles that the free radicals play. And cardiovascular disease is one example. We could look at any of the other examples, cognitive dysfunction. If you're looking at Alzheimer's disease and the cell death induced by the neurofibrillary tangles and the proteins that result from free radical damage. Once again, they kill nerve cells, and that's what leads to Alzheimer's disease. There's documentation, peer-reviewed documentation showing cannabinoids inhibiting that process. The basic theme here is that if we turn on fat burning, we produce fewer free radicals, and we can protect ourselves. And the balance between fat burning and sugar burning can be regulated by cannabinoids as well as other things. And it's through the high-dose use of cannabinoids that we're able to document the reverse of the fat deposition. We're able to show people dramatically lose weight. There's a simple study that was done. They figured, that people who are using cannabis are going to be fatter than the average because they're eating more. Well, surprise, surprise, they're thinner than the average, probably because they've enhanced fat burning by using cannabis.
Everything that you're saying, because I've also been studying paleo, which of course has a lot of similarities, although some differences as well, to the Atkins diet approach.
Yep.
You're familiar with the paleo diet,
yep.
Or that whole concept, eating like a caveman. For those of you can listening, can Google paleo diet or eating like a caveman, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of fascinating information about eating how our bodies were meant to eat for thousands of years of evolution, not this garbage food that we've Franken foods that have just emerged over the past few decades. But it's interesting. Basically, you're letting credence that if one were to have a paleo type of diet and be utilizing cannabis, that would actually regulate and restore a lot of the healthy body functions. That makes a lot of sense to me from my own experience in delving into these subjects. But are you saying that there's a definite connection to these two things and that it would be beneficial for people? I'm just jumping perhaps to conclusions here, but is that a safe conclusion to be made?
Well, let me try to simplify. As I mentioned, there's always a balance of opposing forces everywhere on all scales of life. And one of the most fundamental realities is that flowing energy generates organization. And that once you have life, all energy generation has a common denominator in that there are certain types of reactions called redox reactions that are the basis for all life. And basically it's biological electricity.
Uh-huh.
Now, you can one of the balancing acts that occurs is a balance between sugar burning and fat burning. And a number of years ago, with a brilliant friend of mine, Karen Newell, we published a paper that shows that all cancers can be divided into two types: drug-sensitive cancers that you can kill with drugs, and drug-resistant cancers that kill you. So it doesn't matter if you're talking lung cancer, prostate cancer, etc. If it's drug-sensitive, it has certain biochemical characteristics.
Okay.
It burns sugar. And it's susceptible to the drugs. But what the drugs do is they damage the cells, and the cells then communicate with the immune system, and the immune system comes and kills the damaged cells. The amount of chemotherapeutic drugs that are used to treat people is about 100-fold lower than what's needed to kill the same cancers in tissue culture. The difference being that tissue culture doesn't have the immune system. It's your immune system that's responsible for a lot of the killing that occurs when you're dealing with chemotherapy. However, unfortunately, most chemotherapy also kills the immune system. So that takes you back to who dies first, the cancer or the person. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it's way too often the person. And the negative effects of the chemotherapy are manifest in so many different ways. People should, at the very least, if they're going down the chemo pathway, be using cannabis because of its neuroprotective and other protective functions. And
just to at least alleviate the symptoms of the chemo experience as well.
It's not symptoms. It's alleviating the problems.
Okay.
It's not just symptomatic. It's actually making the person healthier and resistant to the killing. It's going to help protect their nerve cells when they get irradiated, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, interesting.
But the point I'm trying to make is that we're dealing really, in my opinion, with metabolism as the underlying cause if we're taking in too many sugars, if we're burning too many sugars, then we're going to make more free radicals. Your body's going to try to protect you by doing things like giving you insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is because you've been feeding too much sugars and making too many free radicals, and your body's trying to save you from yourself by making you insulin resistant so that your cells will stop burning the sugar. They're trying to protect themselves. So when you look at some of these drugs that are used, they're not solving the problem. They're allowing the problem to continue and be diverted into other things. So what I'm getting at, once again, here is it's critical that we don't overeat, that we maintain appropriate levels of fat burning to protect ourselves from our gluttonous tendencies. Mm-hmm. And we can do that by eating certain foods that promote fat burning. In particular, things like anything that stimulates PPARs, peroxisome proliferating activating receptors, that are responsible on the one hand for fat deposition, but on the other hand for fat burning. So we only really burn fat when we need to. And if our diet promotes it, that's great. And unsaturated fatty acids, again, which are made into endocannabinoids, also stimulate fat burning.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so it all comes down to that story. The drug-resistant cells, which kill us, are all burning fat. And it turns out that cannabinoids, even though high doses promote fat burning, they also wind up killing those fat-burning cells when you're dealing with cancer cells. It's very complicated to explain it all. You'd have to take one of my courses. I teach a course on aging. I teach a course on endocannabinoids and medical marijuana. I teach a course on immunology. I teach a course on DNA repair. And all of those courses center around this far from equilibrium thermodynamics and the nature of the flow and how, if we understand the flow and how it creates our lives, we can manipulate the flow in a way to extend our lives and promote health.
Now, it sounds like
to that story.
It sounds like, of course, everything that we were saying in the past few minutes, it's really beneficial for people with diabetes. But, of course, now you just touched upon aging. And, of course, we have a large segment of the population, baby boomers aging, part of the population that, of course, is paying attention to aging and the related effects of aging. Is cannabis and cannabinoids in a way a fountain of youth? And if so, how would that be beneficial for people who are aging to utilize cannabis?
Well, that's what I'm trying to explain is that, if you make the knockout mice, the mice die prematurely, so that tells you need your cannabinoid activity. Uh-huh. We know there's a mind-body connection. If you're depressed all the time, it affects your body. Well, you want to you're depressed because you're not making enough cannabinoids. So supplement. Take the fish oil. If that helps, great. If you need more, then you got to go to the extreme and use some cannabis. But every one of these illnesses, these age-related illnesses, have free radical production as their basis. If your mind gets appropriately tuned, well, then maybe instead of eating at McDonald's all the time, everybody's seen Super Size Me, Mm-hmm. If your brain is functioning properly, you're not going to eat at McDonald's 3 times a day for a month at a time and kill yourself. It's how the whole. Remember, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's how the whole interacts with everything else within us to create who we are. And if we're lucky, things are working, mind is good, and we're happy, and we're content, and we're able to say, well, I'm not going to eat junk food, and I'm going to eat healthy food because I enjoy being alive. I enjoy interacting with my family. I enjoy all of the blessings of being alive, and I want to continue that. So, again, the most important thing for all of us people who are on the right side of the fence here is that we've got to educate ourselves and we've got to educate others. And the truth is on our side. And by truth, I don't simply mean the scientific truth. I mean the fact that people are getting better by using these compounds. We've got a guy we had published on our website when we were publishing our activist stuff before the schism that I mentioned. He had the most horrible case, and still has, of squamous cell carcinoma. His whole head is covered with it. He had tumors extending inches above his head. the doctors wanted to cut off his skull and his scalp, and then other doctors gave him 130 irradiation treatments, and then he had chemotherapy, and all of those treatments would make the cancers grow. And then he used cannabis, and I get phone calls, Bob, the cancer is falling off my head. It's clogging my brain. You know, he's been on it for over a year. His whole head is now eaten away. The cancer is eaten away down to the skull. But it's gone. It's going. But along the way, for a variety of other reasons, he wound up being hospitalized, getting hospital infections. And when they tested him, after he had basically a stroke from hitting his head, I don't want to go into all the details here, but the bottom line is he was in the hospital, and the doctor said, I can't believe it. You're 60 years old, and I'll trade arteries with you any day. You've got no fat deposits. Why? Because of the high-dose cannabis use. Another friend who lost 40 pounds in 2 months, she had sugar levels of 600. The doctors were worried she was going to die. She went on the high cannabis, got off her other diabetic meds, and lost 40 pounds in 2 monts. And we've seen these things.
So she lost weight on cannabis.
High-dose cannabis, you'll burn fat. You're going to get hot. People who are taking Rick Simpson's oil for HIV, for example, and Kaposi's,
for what it's worth,
hot.
You just answered a question that's been burning in my mind for a while because I couldn't understand this. Last summer, I actually was ingesting some more cannabis in order to treat some of my chronic illness or chronic pain that I've been experiencing, and I also succeeded in losing weight. Like my body felt much better. I lost a substantial amount of weight, but in a positive sense. I mean, I look a lot better than I did before, if I can just say for what it's worth. And in my mind, I couldn't comprehend how come my body improved in so many respects, other than what I was just treating with cannabis for. But in addition, I also lost weight. So are you saying that a lot of people following the Rick Simpson oil, of course, it stimulates their diets for people who need to eat, maybe like those who are been on chemo. But can it actually help you to lose weight as well? Think of the Atkins diet. You eat nothing but fat, and it winds up being good for your heart, and you lose weight. Absolutely, I'm a firm believer in that.
Why?
Because eating fat is good for you.
You're not giving them carbohydrates to burn; they're burning fat. Burning fat is healthy for you. Storing fat is unhealthy for you. You store fat when you take in too many carbohydrates and too many saturated fats, etc. If you take in unsaturated fats, you promote fat burning.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to use our brains to learn about what's good for us and bad for us and act accordingly.
And so in many respects, observing the effects of using high-dose cannabis and see what it does and take advantage of that, I guess.
Well, what we know it does from what we've seen anecdotally, so of course this is totally rejected by the scientific community because it has not been proven by the FDA in a clinical trial, peer-reviewed, blah, 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 blah. The reality is that we have seen so many cancers cured by people with high-dose cannabis, leukemias, lymphomas, gliomas, multiple myeloma, skin cancers, you name it. It doesn't work for everybody all the time. But it does work for many people many times. And it's profound. And we see people with these other illnesses. Now, the point is, how do you interpret scientific literature? Do you look at it from the point of view who understands what's going on with cannabis, or do you look at it from the point of view of somebody who does not understand and who doesn't want to understand because it's a threat to your whole world view?
Aren't a lot of scientific studies set up to prove a point, prove a hypothesis, and if it's
it's how you interpret it. A lot of times you can take the same piece of data and interpret it two ways.
And knock off data averaging as well. Sorry for interrupting. Please continue.
I missed what you said. I'm sorry.
Well, and also sometimes data is dropped. Some numbers are dropped to fit the models better, so to speak.
Well, it's not even that data is dropped. Whole experiments are dropped. The drug companies tend to, and scientists involved with drug companies, it's been shown, tend to have favorable studies for whatever drug they're looking at, whereas people who are not involved, that favorability level drops. Also, a drug company might do 50 studies and publish 2 of them, the 2 that show something good, and not publish the 50 that show something bad.
Right, of course.
A lot of money and power involved in all of this. And that's why it's so important for the people to be educated and aware consumers of their health industry. Because you cannot rely on physicians and their opinions. They're largely educated by the pharmaceutical company. They don't even know the endocannabinoid system exists, the bulk of them. So, we're in a very strange world.
Absolutely. We certainly are. Can I ask you also, because of course you're talking about the cannabinoids, there's been a lot of research lately in particular with CBDs, and of course there's a lot of specific benefits attributed to specifically THC, specifically to CBDs, and to other cannabinoids as well. Because of course your scientific background and your knowledge of the endocannabinoids as deeply as you do, can you also share with us a little bit specifically about what are the benefits of THC? What are the benefits of CBD, and why is there so much interest lately on high CBD strains?
All right. Well, the interest in high CBD strains is because they don't get you high. And they have been shown to have a number of benefits. They have been shown to have some cancer-killing properties, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that's extremely interesting is the work done by Dr. Bill Courtney with juicing, where you're basically taking in the acid forms of THC and CBD. The acid form of THC does not get you high. However, my hesitation with overemphasizing either of those 2 alternatives is that so much of the science shows that a lot of the cancer-killing properties, for example, has to occur via CB1 and or CB2 receptors. Now, there may be more going on, I'm sure there is, that I don't understand, but at this point, from what I've heard through the grapevine, because so much of what we're doing is always anecdotal, people who are trying to use high CBD strains to make a Rick Simpson oil that doesn't get you high have not been having success with cancer.
Oh, interesting. Okay, thanks for sharing that.
Well, I don't know if it's true. I'm just telling you that's what preliminary noise is suggesting.
Okay.
So we have to find these things out. But again, my perspective always is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. This plant is magical. Raphael Mechoulam, the godfather of cannabinoid science, really, who discovered the synthesis of THC and was involved in all of the major advancements. Just a brilliant, beautiful man. He calls cannabis plant the treasure trove of pharmaceuticals. It is. There's somewhere close to 100 cannabinoid compounds, as well as terpenes and flavonoids and all these other important compounds that regulate your biochemistry. Because cannabis is completely non-toxic in that you can never get enough to kill you, it's safe for you to experiment. The other truth is that nobody likes to get too high. Anybody who's eaten too much and gone to those very uncomfortable places is going to make sure and not do that again. It's not nice to get too high. Unfortunately, for some illnesses, you do have to go there. And Janet Sweeney from the Phoenix Tears Foundation made a brilliant discovery that if you take a nutraceutical called citicoline in conjunction with the high-dose cannabis, it minimizes a lot of the negative psychological effects. So, we have a world now of cannabis citizen scientists, especially in places like Colorado and California and Arizona and the states that have legalized. And it's the people taking medicine into their own hands because they can safely do it with cannabis when it's non-toxic. And because of the variability between strains, what I always tell people is, experiment. Find what strain works for you and enjoy it. And it's not going to always be the same for everybody. Regular medicine is so cookbook-oriented that they want to take this many milligrams of this and this many frequency per day. You don't have to be that way with cannabis. Find what works for you and, enjoy the relief.
And generally speaking, the natural plant, because of course it has the synergy of so many components that we don't necessarily understand, as opposed to the individual extracted components, such as like a drug such as Sativex, where you have only THC or only one.
No, Sativex is a mixture.
Oh, is
it's
it? Okay.
Marinol that's only THC.
Oh, right. So, but generally speaking, the mixture, and of course, cannabis, the different plants, the different strains, have somewhat different properties. But overall, is it because of the synergy of all the cannabinoids and the terpenes and everything else that might be in the plant that's creating the outstanding benefit, or can something like Marinol still have desirable results?
Marinol can have some functions, but in every test that has ever been done where people have a choice of using, straight THC or extracts or the smoked plant, the straight THC never wins. And if you've ever taken Marinol, I'm a person who's been using cannabis. I'm a legal medical cannabis user. I have a variety of reasons why I need to use it, and why it's benefited me throughout my life, other than just the ADD story. I'm HLA-B27, which predisposes me to ankylosing spondylitis, back problems, psoriasis. I have back problems. I have psoriasis. Cannabis is a blessing for me. It always has been. And I use it with, all of the things that I talked to you about are the results of my trying to understand life and health and how I can improve my life and health as well as share that knowledge with others.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot what I was answering, though.
Well, sort of the question I started to ask, well, of course, we were just talking about the Marinol and the specific of the just the THC only. But I just wanted to sort of back up a little bit further in the question. The previous to that was, of course, talking about THC and CBD specifically, some of the benefits of those particular cannabinoids. Because I know there's a lot of interest, and people specifically speak of these cannabinoids. And perhaps, can I just also ask, because, of course, you mentioned Dr. Courtney earlier, who, of course, does a lot of juicing as well. And so, of course, he's dealing with cannabinoids that are still in their acid form. So, of course, they haven't been decarboxylated. So you have THCA and I understand CBDA as well. How are these variants? If one were to ingest a THCA, for example, which it's the molecule of THC which hasn't been decarboxylated. I'm mentioning this for the benefit of the listeners, not for you, of course. But how are these substances beneficial for our bodies, and how come juicing raw cannabis might actually have some benefits as well?
Well, remember, as I mentioned, there are hundreds of interesting compounds in this plant, so we don't know what's doing what. All we know is when you take the acid forms, you're not getting stoned. But you're dealing with 100 chemicals impacting on your biology. Bill's wife has made remarkable health improvements using just the juicing. So juicing has definitely a role. Again, I go back to the same statement. Find what works for you. If juicing works for you, great. If you need THC and that works for you, great. Whatever works for you. This plant has so many opportunities for us to explore, some of which will get you high, some of which will not get you high. It doesn't matter. What you're trying to do is to get into a state of increased health. And this plant has many ways by which it seems to be able to promote human health.
Okay. Interesting.
And again, holistic. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We don't want to rip it down to a single chemical in a single pathway. That's not the way we work. That's not the way this medicine works. That's the way pharmaceuticals don't work. So all I'm saying is I demand that we have the choice as free human beings on this planet, and in particular as citizens of America, a country that prides itself in freedom, that we have the right to utilize science and a plant for our own benefit.
Absolutely. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. Are there any other points? And by the way, I'm just going to edit this part out. Just having a little sidebar conversation here. I'm just trying to see what other points would you like for us to address. What other messages would you like to share with the audience today, so that.
Well, the fundamental nature of the physics that creates life is cooperation. Molecules cooperate to organize things. And once you reach the level of people, that's what we should be doing as well, That's essentially the voice of God, is peace, love, cooperation, and progress, So that we as cannabinoid knowledgeable and cannabinoid endowed individuals, we have to be helping each other and everyone that we can in terms of education and in terms of helping them to move forward so that we can have a healthier, happier planet. We have to be engaged. We have to talk with our politicians. We have to be knowledgeable. We can't be full of crap in what we say. We have to do our best to be as accurate and as tight with what we say, but we have to communicate, and we have to really make sure that these politicians understand that they have to listen to the voice of the people, not to the voice of the lobbyists. Mm-hmm. We got to dump the bulk of them and replace them with a new type of, we have to change our political, not our system is good, it's the people who are in it. You know, it was back, I think, in '85 that they finally eliminated the bar that they had in Congress. You know, in a sense, I think it's time for us to complete the prohibition experiment. We tried, 70 years where we forbid cannabis, and you couldn't be a cop or a legislator. Well, maybe now it's time to try the other half. Maybe we should have only cannabinoid endowed people. I'm not into legislation mandating that. I'm into the voice of the people mandating it. So make sure everybody gets out, votes, and works to create the change that we all know we need.
Well, wouldn't that be something if it actually became law that politicians were obligated to consume cannabis in some way, shape, or another before doing their jobs? Yeah,
we have to have dirty urine. If you don't fail your urine test, you can't be a member of Congress. No, I'm obviously being facetious here, but in fact, we have only done half of the experiment.
Right, well, we need to.
And it's the medical marijuana movement now, and the people that are doing the other half, and we just have to have that permeate our legislature. Mm-hmm. We know that a lot of these guys who are getting high, and a lot of them get high and will deny it, and will even support prohibition. We have to get honesty and integrity back into the government. We've got to get rid of the financing that is driving the government today. We have to go to a simpler format here. We can't spend billions of dollars on advertising so that somebody gets elected. We've got to find a different formula where money does not dominate our political choices as we create these so-called leaders. How can you have a leader if he's backward-looking? Mm-hmm. You can't lead backwards. You got to lead forwards,
Absolutely.
So we need flips.
Well, just putting it out there for the listeners, just a thought that I've also was having about the political systems. Considering now with our age of technology, I'm thinking, of course, they're talking about having electronic voting, but why not have monthly electronic voting on the issues, not on politicians, but have the jobs of the politicians just be to implement the will of the people. Put forth the issues, put it to a vote, and then the majority vote, have the politicians work to make it happen, as opposed to essentially.
Well, people will say because we're a representative democracy, not a true democracy. So I have a solution that actually touches on what you were saying. It's something I proposed years ago when I was in Vermont and first became politically active. It's something I wrote up called We the People. And basically, when we fill out our taxes, each of us as individuals should have a right to check how much we want to go to education, how much we want to go to defense, so that our tax proportion will be spent the way we as an individual want it. So collectively, the will of the people will be manifest through the legislatures, but that their budgetary restrictions will be determined by the collective vote.
Well, isn't that actually a fabulous idea? And if we can actually, for example, reduce the percentage of our taxes being spent on jails, for example, at least by 50%. Well, isn't something like 50% of the people incarcerated today, especially in the United States, cannabis-related, nonviolent cannabis?
Absolutely.
So if we were to just reduce the budgets right there by 50%, I think it would force a new reality with this whole prohibition as well. But
well, I might really like to see a lot of our money going to education. I would feel so nice to know that my tax dollars went where I wanted them to go.
Absolutely.
So we're not restricting, the politicians other than that they have to basically abide by the will of the people as defined by their tax statements. And then we would eliminate all of this insanity that goes on because, the country has really become non-functional.
Well, obviously, with the economic situation as it is in the U.S. and many other countries as well, something's got to give. Something's got to be changing. Of course, the definition of insanity is keep on doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, countries are on the verge. Well, countries have actually been collapsing economically speaking, so to speak, and we need to be changing these systems. And of course, the outrageous expense of this prohibition. Like two things. The way I look at it is this: is the prohibition is created an industry of police, lawyers, and jail systems, and these things are ultimately not productive. They're not producing anything of value. But if we were to legalize cannabis, and of course the jobs would shift into farming and agriculture, industrial production of various different products based on cannabis, now the money there would still be an industry. However, now we're also producing something which would contribute to the GDP of the nations, and it would be productive as opposed to having an economy based on destructive industries. I think there's definitely a value to legalizing from that perspective alone, just weeding out the wasted tax dollars and creating something beneficial.
You just reminded me of something I want to go back to because you talked about economic collapse of nations.
Yes.
I want to go back to the HIV story because it's so critical.
Okay.
Right now, if we look at a country like Nigeria, the United States gets, I think, 15% of their light sweet crude oil from Nigeria. Al-Qaeda is in Nigeria because of their instability. Well, it turns out that 25% of the population, including the military of Nigeria, is HIV positive. Similar levels are found in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and throughout the South African area there.
I didn't quite catch the percentage. What was the percentage again?
25%.
Wow.
So the United States government is now becoming very concerned not only about the collapse of individual nations, but the collapse of the entire continent. And it's because of the prevalence of HIV and HIV-associated illnesses. And they have no solution to how to deal with that. And we are now giving them the solution, cannabis.
Wow. It could save the world, and I never really thought that it would actually can do something for...
It's now becoming a means for national security.
Interesting. Okay, so explain to me, just so I understand, and of course all us listeners, because just so we understand mentally what you're referring to. So by providing cannabis, saying seeds, or providing them pills or extracts or whatever, how would this directly help those nations? How would this directly help those people? How would this become a national... Well,
number one, the people who are dying of carposes will no longer be dying of carposes.
Okay.
And in addition, one of the side effects of treating people who have carposes with high levels of cannabis, and remember, we're talking about people who are HIV drug resistant, so they're not on drugs. They should be dead, right?
Yes.
What we're seeing is when they use the high cannabis, when they turn on fat burning, HIV and carposes both require sugar burning. They don't want fat burning. That's not the way they've evolved in their relationship back and forth, host-predator relationship. So that it turns out that people who are on high-dose cannabis and are retrovirals are often doing quite well.
Okay, hold on a second. You just said something profound. Okay, so let me to rephrase and paraphrase what you've just said. By using this natural medicine of this, I would imagine like a Rick Simpson oil preparation of cannabis, some way, shape, or form, instead of the pharmaceutical retrovirus drugs, people are doing quite well, and perhaps even better. And you didn't say better, but they're doing quite well, but implying that it could be better. And, of course, you're also implying that these other nations, rather than sending them the drugs that I remember earlier in the conversation, you said that the pharmaceutical companies can't necessarily produce enough for these 50 million individuals, but yet we can send seeds, and, of course, within a few months they can actually have plants that are providing the medicine. Are you telling me that cannabis is beneficial for people with cancer, and that it alone could perhaps even replace the other pharmaceuticals to make people live longer, healthier, better, who have AIDS already?
Absolutely. From what we are seeing, that is true. I have one friend in particular who went off his antiretrovirals last September because he was totally drug resistant, as evidenced by the fact that he came down with Kaposi's.
Is this anecdotal, or are we talking there's scientific basis to this as well?
Well, it's anecdotal in that it hasn't gone through the NIH and the FDA. So that means that anything that's not been approved by the FDA is by definition anecdotal. That's how the system has created the definitions. All right.
Okay, so it's not to devalue the cannabis as a medicine just because we're saying anecdotal. Because unfortunately, it's illegal for a lot of research to be happening at this time around cannabis. So we can't get medical evidence. So I think anecdotal evidence, considering that there's an overwhelming amount of anecdotal evidence, I think that is something that lends credibility to all these discussions in itself.
We have recently found out that a number of people have successfully treated that Kaposi with HIV, with cannabis rather, and that a number of people who have failed their drug regimes seem to be surviving quite well just by taking in as much cannabis as they can, depending on their circumstances. I can provide, in my world view, a very sound explanation as to why cannabis can inhibit HIV, and it has to do with fat burning. There's another drug that we should mention to people that's very important and beneficial, and that's resveratrol, which is found in red wine as well as a few other places. And it was responsible for what was known as the French paradox, why the French can eat all these cheeses and fats and creamy foods and not have the heart disease that we have in America. Mm-hmm. And resveratrol was part of the solution to that. It's the purple of red wine, and it turns out that it regulates a very important enzyme in humans and other animals called sirtuins, which in turn regulate gene activity and in turn turn on fat burning. So things like resveratrol have been shown that you can take an old mouse that's fed high-fat diet and you give him resveratrol and it'll run on a treadmill like a young mouse. So there's a lot of science that comes together with this flow of energy, balance of free radical production and sugar and fat burning that provide a coherent story that's completely not embraced by the scientific community. And when I present it to people, I am often called crazy.
But it's astounding, let them call you crazy, but nonetheless, the information that you're sharing, I mean, you've blown my mind a few times already in this conversation, and I'm sure that we're only scratching the surface of the knowledge that you have. And the reason why I also wanted to start off this call emphasizing your education, your background, and of course the company that you're president and CEO of is to, of course, put credibility on you in the sense of people listening so that they're not thinking you're crazy. And, of course, at one point I remember you also mentioned that everything that you're mentioning you can adequately back up. So I'm going under the assumption.
That's what blows my mind. That's what blows my mind is when you show physicians and scientists the science. They don't want to look at it in many cases. They don't want to see it. They can't embrace it. And those who do look at it cursively don't bother to really look at it because if they did, they'd see that the science is there. So, it's a blip-flip story once again.
If only they would pay attention to this. Now, can you give any speculations as to why you think these blips are ignoring the flips with the scientific evidence? Like, why is cannabis?
Because they're blips.
Like, there must be science.
Because they're blips.
Yeah, but aside from just the people who are just obviously naturally not endowed in endocannabinoids, but like, what would be some of the reasons why this information would be suppressed? Why are we having such a hard time convincing people? Like, why is it still a Schedule I drug when it's like with no known medicinal value? I mean, like
because of money. The DEA is very powerful. They're supported by a lot of the other blips. And they're killing people. Let me give you another example of the insanity. Mm-hmm. Back when George Bush Sr. was president, that's when Robert Randall pioneered doing the paperwork to get a physician to get through the compassionate IND that allowed for non-approved medicines to be approved to be utilized. So Robert Randall was the first person to get marijuana from Mississippi farm grown by Mahmoud El Soli, who's a good guy. Mm-hmm. And subsequently 12 people received permission. Some of them are still around. Irv Rosenfeld, L.V. Musica, a couple of, there's 5 people still alive who receive 300 joints every month from the United States government. Now, why is the United States government giving them the drugs, Well, aside from that, the point is this. I watched George Bush Sr. on TV telling in a morning news show that we have no need to legalize medical marijuana because any patient who needs it can get it through this program. About 1 week later, they terminated the program. Why did they terminate it? Because 30,000 people with HIV were applying now that they knew how to do it. So essentially, those 30,000 people and thousands and millions of others who have died between then and now have died because of our government's policies. And now that we know that, to continue these policies amounts to crimes against humanity. And there are enough good people, even if they're blips, who understand when you see people dying that they want to help them. And it's because of that we're slowly but surely gaining support from various religious groups and politicians on both sides of the aisle, because millions of lives are at stake. They have no solution. We have a solution, and some of them are starting to believe it.
There's even religious groups right now that are getting behind this to support the legalization processes? Yes. Really?
Yes. Not the legalization, the medicinalization of cannabis so that cannabis medicines can help people.
Okay.
There's a big difference, and how far people are willing to go. Medical marijuana is verboten, but if you function within the normal government drug regime pathway, they're ready to accept it because they care about other people. I mean, how many churches are in Africa helping people? The new Pope just came out and said how AIDS has got to be something to be dealt with. Well, if they mean it and they are truly Christian, meaning that they are interested in helping people and the poor and the sick, which is the basis of Christianity as I understand it, well, then you have to embrace God's plan. A lot of people are unaware of this, but more modern interpretations of Bible translation, aside from the fact that God said all seed-bearing plants are good, also it turns out that cannabis is in the holy anointing oil.
Oh, yes. Can you please enlighten us about this holy anointing oil? Because I think that's a fascinating subject that a lot of people need to be made more aware of.
Well, in the Bible, there's the recipe. There's the recipe for the holy anointing oil, and one of the things that's been controversial is the translation of the word cannabism. And one translation translates it as a plant called sweet reed, which would not make sense in terms of the use of the holy anointing oil. And the other more modern translation, if I'm understanding things correctly, Bill Bennett's written a whole book Chris Bennett rather has written a whole book about it, basically says that cannabism is cannabis. And that makes sense, I have a lot of friends who belong to the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church, and they have different gospels that they follow, and basically they believe that Christ was ministering people by providing them with the medicine. That's how he helped cure the lame and the blind and the crazy. It was by giving them cannabis, and that he was basically killed for revealing these health secrets that were held, by the elite. Mm-hmm. So who knows? It's just very interesting that, that there are these alternative interpretations for so much of what we accept as being dogmatic reality.
And just if I could just say for what it's worth, just since we were talking about this holy anointing oil, I've also looked in the recipe and the actual preparation of how it's made. You can actually find it online as well for those who choose to Google it. But what's interesting is if you look at how much cannabis goes into making this oil, and of course the other substances such as the acacia, the cinnamon in there as well. But nonetheless, forgetting about the other ingredients, the amount of cannabinoids in this, and of course you smear some on your head or on the body parts that are affected. Well, those of us who use cannabinoids or cannabis topically for arthritic pains or other, treatments of, cancerous lesions or even warts and other little skin blemishes as well that can respond well to this. These cannabinoids, they're so concentrated in this holy anointing oil, it goes transdermally through the skin, just like a nicotine patch in a sense, and it gets into the system, and it's no wonder that there's medicinal benefits to the holy anointing oil that, of course, has been tutored in the Bible. Even today, this holy anointing oil would still be regarded as medicine, and in fact, many are using a variation of it today because, essentially Rick Simpson's oil is perhaps a little bit more concentrated, but essentially, that's what it is.
Well, it doesn't have the extra goodies. It doesn't have the myrrh and the other ones that are in the holy anointing oil. But I can tell you that that's what was used on Jack Herrera when he had diabetic ulcer sores on his legs that weren't healing. The holy anointing oil healed it up for him.
Well, there you go. Works in the Bible, and it still works today. I find it interesting.
Yeah, we just have to have our legislators understand reality.
But just for what it's worth, I just find it also fascinating when sometimes you hear stories, whether they be biblical or even more ancient, that of course gets validated by science. So of course we have this holy, sacrament oil, but now science, we recognize why it's so beneficial and it creates all these miracles. Because it is a miracle oil. We call it the miracle plant as well. Is it any wonder that this oil biblically had such profound effects? Scientifically, we're beginning to understand that today. But just thought it was worth mentioning there. And of course, I'm sure, Dr. Melamede, you understand that it's just interesting to get scientific validation to religious or historical things such as this. But one question I wanted to ask about, just for our understanding, because of course you mentioned a couple times about CB1 and CB1 and CB2 receptors, and of course there's a lot of reference to people reading about cannabis, CB1, CB2, but I don't think a lot of us, and even myself, I don't really think most of us really understand what is that. What are these receptors? Can you just briefly explain for us lay people to understand what these receptors are and how this works with cannabinoids?
Well, everything in the cell, remember I told you have to be able to take in enough organizational energy to keep the cell organized. Essentially, the cells spit out disorder, entropy, and they take in negative entropy, organization. And they have to be able to match their biochemical flow with their environment. Otherwise, there's a mismatch, and then the flow doesn't work correctly. So receptors sense different things. Think of receptors like ears. And think of the chemicals that bind to them like words. So cells have to be communicating with each other and their environment all the time. Sometimes their environment is of the cells. Sometimes it's outside the organism. It all depends on what scale you're looking at. But in all events, you have to have that flow happening, and the flow has to be matched with the environment. And all of these different types of receptors that we have on our cells are listening, basically, to their environment and then telling the cells how to shift their biochemistry so that the biochemistry will be in harmony with the environment. That's a very simplistic layman's point of view. We have countless different types of receptors, cannabinoid receptors being a subset of what's known as G-coupled protein receptors. And the CB1 receptors are literally found everywhere in your body, and they regulate everything. And they actually regulate sugar burning. So some of the negatives associated with cardiovascular disease, etc., can be interpreted as being promoted by the cannabinoid system in that CB1 activation. But you have to look at the bigger picture once again. The CB2 receptors wind up popping out. Normally they were called the immune receptors, all right, because they're found always in a whole variety of our immune cells, including B cells and natural killer cells and et cetera. But it turns out, from my perspective, so this is again, I can provide scientific validation, but it's not been properly looked at and validated, okay? Mm-hmm. But it goes back to the fat burning story. Anybody who's used high-dose cannabis will know that if you're taking risk symptom oil for cancer, you're going to get hot, all right, because you're burning fat. But where I'm going with this is that any time there's pathology in any tissue throughout the body, it seems like the CB2 receptor gets upregulated. And it's my contention that the reason it gets upregulated is because the pathology is associated with excess free radical production, which may even be promoted by the CB1 receptor, depending on the circumstances. And the CB2 receptor shuts that down and turns on fat burning.
Okay.
And there's more than CB1 and CB2. There's GPR 55, there's GPR 35, 119, there's the abnormal cannabidiol receptor, there's the vanilloid receptors. What we're really talking about is a huge biochemical swirl involving lipid metabolism, the synthesis and degradation of lipids. And the cannabinoids integrate the burning of lipids and the burning of fats, in my perspective, based on their efforts to minimize damaging excess free radical production.
Okay. So cannabinoids can have these antioxidant effects against these free radicals. Is that true?
Yeah, but I want to clarify something. When we're talking about antioxidant effect, you can mean two things. You can mean that you're directly quenching the free radicals because you have something that'll interact with the free radical. Mm-hmm. And that's typically what we mean by quenching, and anti-free radical activity. However, the bulk of our free radicals, we produce them. So if you regulate the biochemistry that produces them, then you're also having anti-free radical activity. Your cannabinoids do both of those things. They directly quench and they regulate the free radical producing biochemistry.
Can you also explain the relationship between cannabinoids and anti-inflammatory properties? I don't even understand how does anti-inflammatories work. For example, in NSAID, such as Advil, it's anti-inflammatory. You get things such as turmeric. These herbs are anti-inflammatory, and cannabis and cannabinoids are anti-inflammatory. Do they work all similarly, or does
they work on different components? Turmeric actually works directly on some of the cannabinoid receptors, which is why it has benefits. It regulates them in a particular fashion. The NSAIDs, that's a very interesting story. So for years it was known that aspirin has anti-inflammatory properties, and it was eventually learned that the way aspirin works is through an inducible enzyme known as cyclooxygenase 2. And cyclooxygenase 2 takes omega-6 fatty acids and converts them into prostaglandins, some of which are inflammatory and some of which are anti-inflammatory. It also produces a variety of other compounds via lipoxygenases, etc. The point being that cyclooxygenase mediation of omega-6 fatty acids can be pro-inflammatory. On the other hand, it also, aspirin not only shuts down cyclooxygenase and hence can reduce those pro-inflammatory downstream metabolites, but it also shut down cyclooxygenase 1, which is constitutively synthesized in the stomach and has protective properties there. So that's why people who take too much aspirin would get ulcers. Mm-hmm. Now, so wisely, the pharmaceutical companies decided, well, let's try to make something specific for cyclooxygenase 2 and not for cyclooxygenase 1. And that's what the NSAIDs are. So things like Celebrex and Vioxx, those were COX-2 specific inhibitors. And they work great for a lot of people, arthritic pain, etc. The problem is that they did not that they basically shut down pathways that had both pro and anti-inflammatory activities. And they also shut down the metabolism of one of our main endocannabinoids. Arachidonic acid is your omega-6. Arachidonic acid ethanolamine is one of your main endocannabinoids. They're both processed by cyclooxygenase. When you process the arachidonic acid ethanolamide, you make a whole new class of downstream metabolites called prostamides, and many of those are anti-inflammatory and protective. So when people went on to these COX-2 inhibitors, many people had great results. The unfortunate part of that story is that 30,000 people died.
Yeah,
and
that's why, like, for what it's worth, I'm quite familiar with that because my doctor has even prescribed Celebrex. I absolutely refuse to take it, especially when I have cannabis, which is superior.
Well, cannabis is a much wiser alternative.
Yeah, much wiser alternative, but please explain that to my doctors.
Well, again, doctors are ignorant. The doctors don't know the science. You know, you should find doctors. You ask a doctor, if he doesn't know about the endocannabinoid system and the benefits of medical marijuana, find another doctor because he's not going to be able to give you useful information that's up to date and realistic. He's an idiot.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunately the reality of the situation. I'm up here in Canada, by the way, so like down in the States, I know that in certain areas you have more enlightened doctors, such as, for example, in California. I'm sure there's other places.
California is a bunch of great doctors.
That's fantastic. I wish there was more doctors up here like that as well. But one of the problems up in Canada is this: you go doctor hunting, you go shopping around, like hunting in the sense of like going from doctor to doctor, trying to find one who can actually have enough brain cells, or no, perhaps let me just retract that. Not brain cells. It's just
education.
It's education. They're just ignorant of the fact. They haven't educated about the benefits of cannabis. So I apologize. I don't really mean to be derogatory to the doctors. It's just the fact that they have a lack of education on this subject. I wish more doctors were like those in California and other places that actually have an understanding that what cannabis can actually do, and of course what its side effects are and what its benefits are, and then contrast that to other medicines, such as, for example, Celebrex. Like Celebrex, personally, I choose not to take Celebrex because I fancy the idea of walking down the aisle for my daughter's wedding one day. I want to live for that, and I know that if I take Celebrex, statistically speaking, and other factors, I believe that I would not have that opportunity to walk down my daughter's wedding aisle one day. And
well, you see, it all again depends on your genetics and your environment. I mean, Celebrex works fine for some people, and it kills others.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it kills a significant percentage. But here, how many people have died from cannabis? So the question is this: it's like a Russian roulette. Let's load a gun with a bullet, spin the chamber, and point it at our temple and squeeze. So with Celebrex, that is literally a Russian roulette situation. Maybe I'd be totally fine. I don't know. Maybe I'm just speculating here. But with cannabis, I know that I have fantastic results, and the risk of dying from complications are far less. I'm sure you're agreeing with me in a sense, right? Like, am I wrong?
Oh, absolutely. No, I completely agree. I in general don't use any medicines other than cannabis. Although I do have atrial fib, I'm what's called a lone fibrillator. I don't have any apparent reason for fibrillating, but I fibrillate. And the doctors recommended that I take this particular medicine every day. And what I found out was that even when I take the medicine, I would periodically fibrillate. And then I found out why. I found when I dehydrate, like when I talk in lectures for a long time, I dehydrate, that's what promotes the atrial fib for me. So as long as I hydrate all the time, I don't have a problem. And maybe once every 4 months, I dehydrate and then I fibrillate for a few days. And I take the medicine I take the pharmaceutical medicine at that time, and it works great. After about 4 days, the fibrillation goes away.
Okay.
So, but it probably wouldn't be working if I took it every day. We have to become intelligent. If we want to make intelligent decisions about our health, we've got to learn some biology and science. Otherwise, you're going to be doomed to stupidity.
Well, I guess education leads to freedom. That's my motto that I'm going with the summit, but it's not just about cannabis. It's about everything, education.
Everything. Yeah.
Everything, yeah. I got a question for you. Of course, a little bit earlier we were talking about, of course, how cannabis has both anti-inflammatory and also antioxidant properties. Now, there's a lot of people who they take daily supplements for anti-inflammatory.
Hang on a second. Hang on. I have to take this quick. Hold on, please.
Go ahead. Oh, there we are. Okay. So just out of curiosity, Dr. Melamede, of course, you were speaking a lot about how the cannabinoids have properties of anti-inflammatory properties. Of course, there's also the free radical properties, and there's so many other benefits. Hold on a second. I didn't think of my question. I actually had this really well thought out. I just sorry, Dr. Melamede.
Relax. It's all right. No problem. We're mellow here. We're mellow.
Fantastic.
Actually, some people have said my last name. They call me, instead of Melamede, they call me Mellow Weed.
Oh. Let me see if I can actually put that in, because that's actually a clever play on your name. That's wonderful. Hold on a second. There's a word for free radicals. There's not anti-inflammatory. It's an anti. People take a lot of these pills. It's an anti-something. Geez, I can't remember this off the top of my head.
Well, there's the NSAIDs, the cyclooxygenase inhibitors, COX-2 inhibitors.
People frequently take this as a pill, just as a herbal supplements that not anti-inflammatory, but has free radical properties.
Well, those are pretty much synonymous, by the way. Antioxidants is what you're
Antioxidants,
thinking of.
That's the word I was looking for, yes. So I remember I was about to ask you that question, and so anyhow, okay, I'll just get into the question. So, Dr. Melamede, of course, you've spoken about the fact that these cannabinoids have antioxidant as well as anti-inflammatory properties, and of course you were alluding to the fact that cannabis can also be used as a daily supplement to help our natural endocannabinoid system so that we can be more endowed with the cannabinoids in our system. So would you perhaps recommend, or what would you recommend in terms of people using cannabis on a regular basis? Would it be just using the hemp oil or using the cannabis, whether it be ingesting it or smoking it? How would you recommend that people use cannabis, not necessarily to get high, but to boost their natural cannabinoids levels in their systems for all these health benefits that you've spoken about today?
Well, it all depends on where they're starting from. If you're a young person and you're looking to do the best to optimize your health and long-term survival, then, eating proper foods, eating calorically restricted, eating a lot of essential fatty acids, and as we've mentioned, the omega-3s from fish oils and krill oil are made into endocannabinoids, as well as the seed oil found in hemp seeds, for example. Those are all very good for you. You've got to obviously stay away from a lot of fried foods. Fried foods are very inflammatory, especially if you're using old cooking oil. Stay away from anything that has that tendency to promote inflammation, because that's what builds up over your lifetime. It's what I call the friction of life. So you want to keep yourself well-oiled, which means you're not developing that biological rust. But again, depending on the condition, you have to go to more extremes. It's quite clear that cannabis use does have anti-aging properties. I mean, that's scientifically documented, as exemplified by the knockout mouse of the CB1 receptor. The mouse that can't get high dies early. It was also proven in humans in the sense that they used rimonabant, the CB1 inhibitor, in an effort to promote weight loss and reduce the development of metabolic syndrome. But if you knock out that CB1 receptor, what they found was people were killing themselves because they're too depressed. So a lot depends on where you're starting. If you're a depressed individual, for example, and you take some essential fatty acids and they help, great. But in many cases, people have to be a little more extreme. And what works actually quite effectively is just, for many people, just taking a drag or two. The beauty of smoking, which I don't do at all, I'm an eater because I have very sensitive lungs. but I have needs for it. But just a drag or two for a person who's depressed can often switch that right around. So it's not like they've got to smoke a lot of marijuana. They just have to shift their balance on demand as they need it. And, there's vaporizing pens available now that would be very useful for circumstances like that. Nausea is typically resolved very quickly with just a drag or two. You'll get unnauseous before you'll get stoned. So, everything with cannabis is about adaptation. That's the nature of what the system within us does and how the plant impacts on us. We've discussed open-mindedness. Open-mindedness is how we adapt to change. And your cannabinoid system is involved in all of that. So rather than having hard, fast rules, which is the way typical medicine and pharmaceutical companies approach things, with cannabis, really, it is very individual because we are all individuals. Let me emphasize that point. If you grow up a bunch of genetically identical mice and they're fed the same food, they're housed in the same housing, and you go into experiments with them, you don't get the same results from every mouse. So as identical a situation genetically and environmentally as we can create, it's still not good enough because there's more to life than that. It all has to do with the uniqueness of our individual biochemical flows, and you can never have identity. It'll never happen. So what people's individual needs are, since you're dealing with something that's non-toxic, it's not like regular meds, even aspirin. I don't know if we've talked about this in the past or not, but it's got a therapeutic index of 15-1. You take 2 and you're good. You take 15 and you die. The cannabis, they estimate it to be 40,000-1. So nobody's going to smoke 40,000 joints. That's not a problem. Take what you have available and experiment to see what works best for you, both in terms of dose and strains and time of day and before or after a meal. All of these things impact on the outcome. And because it's not like other drugs, nobody likes to get too high. That's for sure. Everybody can take enough that they'll reach a point where they'll say, wow, I'm sorry I went there. I've maybe met one person who claims to never have gone there, and he consumes an awful lot. But so do a lot of other people. You can develop your tolerance and take these large quantities, but no matter where you're at, people will not like to go too far. So it's always self-regulating situation. The problem is because of the medical necessity, people have to take more than they want for certain conditions like cancer. You need to take the high doses. So it's interesting,
Can I just ask you a quick question? I wasn't planning on asking this, but just based on what you've said, of course, you're talking about the antidepressant properties of it, and of course, there's even the CB1 inhibitors that, of course, make people depressed, and other things that you've just mentioned. Last month I quit cannabis for the reason of just making sure the safety of the summit, to preserve the summit, so that nothing can happen there. Like if I were to get arrested, that would jeopardize the summit. But anyways, the point that I'm making is, of course, cannabis is not addictive. However, having abruptly stopped it, I did have some withdrawal symptoms. Now, I've quit smoking cigarettes in the past, and of course that's far worse, and I've quit other substances such as caffeine.
What were the symptoms that you observed?
Essentially the opposite of what cannabis does. Like I had a hard time sleeping. I found myself anxious, irritable, depressed, those types of things. And so the reason why I'm asking this is, of course, I think I've got the sensation of what it's like to be a blip, a backwards-looking individual. But the point of the matter is, of course, if you're using cannabis to augment the endocannabinoid systems and you just abruptly stop, can that, of course, obviously after some time the body readjusts, but are there any particular problems that might cause that because of your awareness or your knowledge of the endocannabinoid system? Can you shed any insights on what happens when a person goes through cannabis withdrawal?
Well, most people don't have any significant issues when they stop doing it. the studies that have defined what they call the cannabis withdrawal syndrome have not really been, in my mind, from what I know, and maybe I'm missing something, but they've not been properly controlled. If you take a whole bunch of high-dose users and, frequent users, not for extreme high doses, but frequent users, and then they stop using it, well, there is a population, there's a subpopulation in that group that to begin with might have been depressed, whether they knew it clinically or not, or didn't sleep as good as when they used cannabis, because nobody sleeps as good as when you use cannabis. So, of course, when you stop using it, you're not going to sleep as well. And, if you're depressed and you're using cannabis and you didn't even know that you really were depressed to, whatever degree that might mean, and you stop using it, well, of course, you're going to see those, phenotypes emerging. It's not necessarily because you had a withdrawal symptom. It's because, in the conventional sense, it's because you had a medical problem that you successfully treated. It's like you take antibiotics away from somebody before they've cured the bacterial infection. The bacterial infection comes back. Does that mean they were addicted to the antibiotics, or does it mean that they biochemically needed them, to promote their health? So I think there's a number of issues there to be considered. It's certainly not in any way, shape, or form like heroin when you stop it because your body has turned down the production. What happens with the cannabinoid receptors is you actually do turn down the receptors, especially in different parts of your brain, so you don't get as high. But in other areas, they've shown that you do not adjust to some of the cardiovascular effects, for example. And that could be profound if you have high blood pressure and you're treating your high blood pressure with cannabis. Even if you're not getting high, as long as your blood pressure is getting treated. And that seems to be what occurs for many people, because many medical users will always tell you, I don't use it to get high, I use it to get normal.
Yeah. And that's actually what I've been saying as well. I've been using it to get normal, and for what I have to say, cannabis has been absolutely astounding, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this whole summit, is because I realized that this is such a powerful, good medicine that I see so many people can really benefit from. And by the way, the withdrawal symptoms weren't that bad, and compared to heroin, I have no experience with heroin, but I do have experience with nicotine, which has been my worst nemesis. And I actually used cannabis to quit smoking. But anyways, that's a story for another time. And I want to respect the time that we've had together, and I just want to end on a positive note, because of course I just shifted into the negative side. But of course you were talking, the previous question I just wanted to reiterate, you were mentioning, of course, supplement the endocannabinoid system by a little puff or something along those lines, also using the omega-3 fatty acids, but also avoiding the things that cause inflammation, such as the other bad oils or bad food choices. So it's not just using cannabis to help towards health, but also to avoid the things that detract from health in the first place as well. And I think that's a good balance of what you were mentioning there. Dr. Melamede, there's obviously, you're just such a wealth of information on cannabinoids. I didn't anticipate the conversation would go as long as it has, and I am just absolutely astounded by the amount of things that I've personally learned just by speaking with you today. And so for all of us, I want to first of all thank you, but where can we learn more from you? You obviously have some websites, Cannabis Science, that organization. Can you just tell us where can we learn more about you and about the work that you're doing, and find out some more of the information that you share? Any particular website?
CannabisScience.com has a bit. We broke off a lot of the activism as we go into a more formal drug development stage, but a lot of that stuff is now on another company, public company, Exchange Corporation, XHCH. So you'll find some stuff there. And then I have a university website as well at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. So it would be uccs.edu, and then /Melamede, I think will get you there. But I'm in the biology department there. You can find me pretty easily. And I think probably the best source, I have over 30 YouTubes out there. And
you have, sorry, what? YouTubes?
I have over 30 YouTubes out there, and they're conversations like we've had for this interview, and other cases where I'm just presenting knowledge that I think it's important to get out there. So I think those YouTubes are a tremendous educational opportunity for people who are interested. I get comments from people regularly from all around the world that follow those.
I'll be sure to include a number of those links into the summit so that people can also find them and access them and learn from you as well, because you just have so much information, Dr. Melamede. I want to thank you so very much for taking the time to share some of these insights with all of us today. I hope that some of the listeners have learned something. I know I certainly have. And do you have any final words or any final inspiration thoughts that you'd like to share? And by the way, I'd also like to just quickly put out there, of course, you're Dr. Melamede, but of course, some people like to call you Dr. Mellow Weed, and I think that's definitely an endearing name to call you, and I really appreciate, of course, everything that you've done here. But do you have any final thoughts or messages that you'd like to share with everybody?
Yes, I think it's very important for everybody to get educated, because our doctors and scientists in general are not. Certainly law enforcement is not. And the more our community takes pride in their knowledge and speaks out with that knowledge, that it's such an important time, because we're really turning the corner now to end this insanity. And it's up to all of us to make sure that we do everything we can, bring everybody we know on board. Whenever there's a call to action, we've got to respond. It's a very critical time. We're talking about changing the world.
Absolutely. I completely agree with everything you said, and thank you so very much, Dr. Melamede, for all the inspiration that you've shared with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It's all of us doing everything together that makes the difference.
Fantastic. So I guess that's a wrap, Dr. Melamede. Thank you for doing this call.
All right, I'm going to run because I got another call coming in right now, and I got another one on hold.
Okay. Nice talking.